You know that moment when a student gets the right answer and you're like, cool, but how did you get there? You've said show your work approximately 10,000 times, and yet here you are, staring at an answer with no work. Again. Somewhere along the way, students learned that the only thing that mattered was the answer. Showing that you didn't know, well, that felt risky. And now AI can just do it for them. Welcome to the What and Who of EDU, the show where educators and thought leaders join us to share their strategies and stories straight from today's classroom. Whether you're looking to boost student confidence, build belonging, navigate new teaching challenges, or figure out where AI fits in, we're here with clear, actionable ideas that you can use right away. I'm your host, Marissa Bluestone, and today I'm talking with 10 instructors about how they get students to show their thinking, not just the answer. Because if all we're asking students to prove is the answer, Claude or ChatGPT can do that in 4 seconds or less. So let's get into it. Tip 1. Have students drop the receipts, not just the answer. 42. The answer to life, the universe, and everything. And also completely useless without the question. Douglas Adams got away with that. Your students do not. Dr. Dan Look, the Charles A. Dana Professor of Mathematics at St. Lawrence University, knows there's more to learning than landing on the right number. Because without the reasoning, the answer is just a number.
I try to set it at the very beginning that showing work is about communication. It's all audience and purpose, as any kind of communication is. And so the students often come in with the idea that the audience is the professor and the purpose is just to show the professor you can get the answer, that you know how to solve. I try to reframe that as your audience is your fellow students, right? Your audience is somebody else in this class, and you're not just trying to show them the answer, you're trying to convince them that the answer is the right one. And so you can't skip steps. You need to show all of this work in a way that convinces me of more than your ability to get to the end, but how you also got there. And if I can get them into that mindset, things work out really well. Then they kind of get why I'm asking them to show work. It's not just tediousness. I really do care about how they're solving this. And I also bring up, if there's a novel approach that a student used, that will be brought up in class with the student's permission if I'm going to use their name, just to show like I'm paying attention to how you're doing this and I'm asking you because sometimes you're teaching me something and here's a shortcut that I can share with the students that came from the students.
And if you want to know whether or not it works, well, it does.
Yes, in particular with students who have tricks they learned from other, particular teachers or whatever. Here's a fast way to do this shortcut. And then it becomes a class discussion. Why does this shortcut work? Can we guarantee that it works every time? We can. Okay, use this whenever you would like to. Just let me know that you're using it, right? Make sure I can see what you're doing. And it has happened. It's not that often. It's usually short tricks, a little mnemonics or ways around like factoring or something that's a shortcut.
In Dan's class, the answer is just the tip of the iceberg. What he really wants is the paper trail. In other words, drop the receipts. Tip 2. Put points where your pedagogy is. Here's the thing about telling students that showing their work matters. They will absolutely believe you, right up until the moment where they see how you grade. Because if you're handing out all the points for the answer, students may just skip some steps. Enter Dr. Kristen Monroe, the Educational Research Associate at the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning at the University of Illinois, puts her points where her pedagogy is.
One of the things that I rely on, especially for exams, is I actually draw this out on the board and I say a math problem is worth 5 points. And only one of those points is the right answer. And I point out to them that those 5 points include what was the correct equation or process, showing their math, showing their units, showing the right number of significant figures. So I think that being deliberate and transparent about what the assignment actually entails and the value that we put on those different things. It sounds kind of silly to spell that out for students, but in my mind, I think it's pretty powerful to tell them that the right answer is only worth a fifth of the assignment.
So 1 point for the answer and 4 points for how you got there. That's the difference between saying you value something and actually grading like you do. Tip 3. Ask questions that reveal the process. Since roughly 3rd grade, students have become accustomed to telling you that everything went great, that they followed all of the steps, and there was zero struggle whatsoever. It's a flawless outline that Jennifer Duncan sees through. The Associate Professor of English at Georgia State University's Perimeter College builds in reflection that skips past the performance and gets straight to the actual process. And it's not graded, which is half the reason it works.
As a writing teacher, I know that the correct answer is process over product. And I do still believe that to be the case. But I think what's very difficult for our students and what's very difficult for instructors to design, and it's very difficult for students to complete, are assessments where we ask them to reflect on their process and how they felt about it and what challenges they faced and how they overcame those challenges. Because I think there's a tendency from students to want to pretend they didn't face a challenge. They did everything exactly like you told them to. And you want to say, no, that's not actually what I want. Tell me what was difficult for you. Tell me where you struggled. Tell me where you moved forward. So offering those opportunities for me as a writing teacher, it means frequent reflection questions as they're doing their assignment. But those reflection questions can't be vague. They have to be pre-targeted. And the students have to understand that it's got to be part of a conversation that's not part of their grade. But a question like, how did you feel about using AI on this assignment? Or what do you wish you had known at the beginning of the assignment is really important. And then I think, again, letting students know that you're going to not just read that feedback, but that's going to affect how you move forward, maybe in how you address the next assignment or how you redesign your course in the future so that they understand the value of this. Thinking about thinking is not just for them, but is actually going into how courses are going to be designed. And they're part of the educational process.
So you followed the instructions perfectly? Great. But we're looking for a process, not an alibi. And there are no bonus points for perfection. The growth shows up when something breaks, and you can explain how you fixed it. And students will actually use the space once they know it's not going in the gradebook. Tip 4. Ask why, and why not? The road less taken is still a road. Jennifer Duncan asks students to reflect on what they learned. Sarah Lehman takes it one step further. The professor of biology and STEM outreach coordinator at the University of Mount Olive asks them to explain their choices as they're making them. Not just, why did you do this, but why didn't you do that? Because I thought that's what you wanted is not a thought process.
I am all about the creative assignments, make up your own and explain how you got there type questions. I like them to kind of walk me through their thought process. So I start them with like a simple prompt where they have to create something. And then I'll ask them, okay, well, why did you pick this? Right? Why did you choose this particular feature of this made-up animal that you created? Why did you not choose this? Really kind of getting them to show their whole thinking process and not just kind of memorization, like, oh, this is what Dr. Lehman wants to hear, right? She knows she wants me to go in this order. So I try to give them more of a starting platform where they can really take it in any direction.
The road less traveled is great poetry. But if Sarah Lehman were grading the journey, she'd want to know what was wrong with the other road. Did you clock it? Could you name it? Because I just felt like it might work for Robert Frost, but it does not work in intro bio. Tip 5. Compare notes, not just answers. Okay, so your students can explain what they did. They can justify the choice. Now what? Betsy Langness, the psychology department head at Jefferson Community and Technical College, makes them hold that thinking up next to someone else's. Because nothing reveals your assumptions like discovering someone else's brain took a completely different route to the same destination and somehow also ended up getting it right.
I do have quizzes and self-checks built in that are tell me the right answer. But then with every content area, I also put in there a discussion or an assignment that really helps them talk about critical thinking or to show their thinking. An example of this might be I have them describe a memory aid that has worked for them. And I want them to compare it to at least one of their group member strategies. So when I do this, I'm really having the students think critically. They're supporting their peers with through that peer-to-peer connection and learning from each other. And it also helps them see that there's more way to understand the material and that there's a different approach to learning these concepts. So they're really applying, they're experimenting, they're reflecting instead of just memorizing, which is very interesting when they talk about that memory concept, because I have them talk about that memory tip that they use, and students will go back and forth and say, oh, wow, I never thought of it like this. I could do that. I could do, lots of different examples they can learn from each other.
This is peer learning as a mirror. When you see a memory trick that isn't yours and it works, you have to reckon with the fact that your way isn't the only way. And for a student who's been doing it their way since middle school, well, that realization can hit hard. Tip 6. Peer review or it didn't happen. There's a fast way to find out if a student actually understood something. Ask them to critique someone else's work. Because you can't spot a flaw in someone else's reasoning if you don't understand the reasoning yourself. You can't fake that one. Mary Gurley, psychology instructor at Gaston College, builds that moment right into her class, and it's where everything clicks.
One of the ways I've done it in the past is when they're looking at experiments that other students have designed. And I mean, all of a sudden, they're like these research scholars. They're like, what? That's not even an independent variable. And so, and I'm walking around the classroom hearing this stuff. And then it's just like, I'm like, oh, yeah, but you were telling me 2 weeks ago you didn't even know what an independent variable was, and there was no way you were ever going to get here. I'm teasing them a little bit, but it's like they start to realize, oh, wow, I can see that this is not an independent variable in this study that was poorly written by another group of students, just like me, a month ago or whatever. And it's like, whenever they're being forced to be in a little bit of a seat of power, or not power, but being able to take a critical look at what is a good experiment and what is not a good experiment, that can be a really big moment for a lot of students. Makes them feel confident, oh my God, I really can talk about an experiment a little bit. And that's a big deal, because we talk about in my research methods, the way we start that unit out is I talk about how it's like a foreign language. Nobody goes around in their regular life talking about, let's talk about independent variables, what do you think about them? And that's a core part of understanding research.
When you get, that's not even an independent variable, from a student who didn't even know what that was a few weeks ago, the student is having a moment. Nothing proves you understand something like catching it when someone else gets it wrong. Tip 7. Turn group work into a game show. So your students are working in groups. Now, that might mean thinking is happening, or it might mean one student is carrying the team like it's Group Project Olympics. Dr. Jennifer Ripley-Stickle fixes that by turning group work into live case building game shows. The teaching professor of biology at West Virginia University is the host.
To show that students are thinking or to encourage thinking, I do a lot of group work with case studies. So in this manner, the students, they have to extract the vital information from the case study, and then they have to use their knowledge to offer suggestions or to make conclusions. In class, I give the students about 3 to 5 minutes to work as a team. And then as a class, we will build the case together. So I'll go around and I'll ask for observations or evidence or whatever information is vital that we extract from the case. And I usually have 2 or 3 students up at the board as my recorders because I don't have the time to run back and forth and write things down. And so the students that are recorders will write down pieces of information. And the students that are reporting out, that are giving me the information, I'll even ask them to justify why they thought that was an important bit of information. And even ask other students, why do you think that was an important bit of information? You didn't give it, but still, do you think that's important? Why is that so? And with a class of 250 or even a class of 30, you can accomplish this entire activity in less than 10 minutes if you keep a focus, if you're moving around, and if you use students to assist and talk off of each other. So I, again, do not stay at the front of the class and point. I am like a game show host running around gathering information and having others put it on the board. So we're able to really get each other's thinking and feed off of each other. And by not telling a student if it's correct or incorrect, but rather just gathering all this information and working through it as a class, it encourages, again, them to think. It is not that I'm looking for them to tell me the one answer right away.
So nobody gets to just toss a fact into the air and call it participation. If it goes on the board, it needs a reason. And if it needs a reason, it needs thinking. And if you can do that with 250 students in 10 minutes, then you might be the winner of the mitosis is right. Tip 8, match the format to the thinking. If you came to this episode hoping someone would hand you the one universal format that gets every student to show their thinking in class, Dr. Erica Martinez is here with some loving, well-reasoned bad news. The professor of instruction in economics at the University of South Florida knows there isn't just one. Her approach is basically pick the format that forces the kind of thinking that you're teaching.
These go-to or this one way of doing things, there is no such thing. What class am I teaching? Am I teaching advanced price theory? It's very quantitative. My go-to in that quantitative setting, you have to show step-by-step your math work, or at least as far as you can. And then if you're stuck, you can explain, this is what I would do. Maybe the numbers aren't working because you made a mistake back in step 1 and you can't find it, but you're in step 10 and the numbers are not making sense. But then you can stop and you can explain the math steps. This is how I would do this constraint optimization problem. And so that in a quantitative class, it really is as simple as show the steps. If I have a class with 20 students, I can have a presentation in that class and I'm asking you follow-up questions and I can lead you. It's sort of like when you take the SAT, depending on how you answer question 1, that affects whether or not you can reach 100% because you're going to get different follow-up questions. So I can have that when I'm having a discussion with students on a particular topic that they're presenting. If it is my 900 student class, and I need to see how they're thinking. They have essays that they need to write. Again, in the age of AI, we might have to rethink some of that, but they have to link concepts together. They have to link it to a graph, discuss and describe what's going on in the graph and why it aligns with their theory. There's no one go-to format. Of all the classes that I've taught, there's no 2 classes that look alike.
Show your thinking isn't one assignment. It's a design choice based on what you're teaching and how many students are in the room. Think of this less like pick an assignment and more like pick the right container for the kind of thinking you want to see. Different class, different container, but the same goal, to get the thinking out of their heads and onto the page. Tip 9. Put the thinking in the margins. Sometimes the most powerful way to show thinking is to take students' phones away and hand them a pen. No Reddit, no Magic 8-Ball. No, let me just quickly check. There's just students, a printed page, and whatever is actually inside their heads. To see students thinking, Assistant Professor of English and Composition Coordinator at Clark Atlanta University, Dr. Margaret Holloway, goes old school.
Being that I teach mostly first-year composition courses, my student population typically consists of college freshmen. And what I've been seeing the past couple of semesters is that students who come into my classroom are so heavily reliant on their phones and what other people are saying. They go to the internet to see who's saying what or what the right answer is. It's like they're almost scared to say, well, hey, I think this or I believe this. So I go back to the traditional way of doing things. I print out hard copies of readings and we go through them together as a class. I tell them they have to. I'm not a professor that makes their students put their phones away, but for critical thinking, I do, because I don't want them to even grab for it to, unintentionally look up an answer for something. So just recently, we had a critical thinking class session and the students read James Baldwin. And so I printed out hard copies of that and we went through it was like 3 sections of that reading, a background of who James Baldwin was, a conversation about Black rhetoric, and the actual essay on Black English. And I had them go through the critical thinking process, preview the text, annotate. If you see a word that you don't know, put a question mark by it so you can go back and find a definition to it. If there's something that you have a question about, write the question out in the margins. Underline things that are interesting to you or something that stands out. Going through that process teaches them how to be critical thinkers. So once they go back and look at their notes, they have questions that they can respond to. They have words that they didn't know the definition to. They can go and do that research to find out, what does this word or term or phrase mean? And I find that doing something as basic as that, having them put pen to paper to go through the critical thinking process, is very effective for my students. And then I'm able to ask them, okay, well, what are your thoughts about this section, without looking at any type of commentary on the internet? What are your initial thoughts? It's very basic method, old school for me, because I used to do it back when I was an undergrad, but it works. It still works.
If there's a question mark in the margin, that's thinking. If there's a note connecting 2 ideas, that's thinking also. And if there's confusion written out in pen, that's thinking in progress. Tip 10. Don't give an answer. Give step 1. We've talked about showing the steps, justifying the steps, annotating the steps. But none of that matters if students never take the first one. Dr. Amy Goodman, senior lecturer in mathematics at Baylor University, teaches math in the age of AI. And instead of banning it, she reframes it. She wants students to ask for the first step, not to outsource their thinking.
Right now, I don't so much have any hard boundaries with AI. I encourage students to use AI as a learning companion when they're working on homework and things. Now, having said that, no AI, no technology, not even like 4-function calculators are allowed on my exam. So I tell them I'm only going to assess your intelligence. I'm not going to assess the intelligence of any other device in the room. So while I say go ahead and use AI anytime you need to as you work through homework problems. The other side of that coin is you're going to need to be able to work these problems by yourself on your own. So when I make AI recommendations in class, it usually focuses on how to write a good prompt to get a nudge on a problem without getting the entire solution to a problem. So kind of my overarching recommendation to students anytime they're using an AI is to literally include the phrase, I'm trying to work this problem, insert problem. Please do not work through the whole problem for me or show me the answer. I need to know what would be a good first step. And then AI will generally say the first step should be, and then students can, apply a little critical thinking to that. Does that seem like it's the reasonable first step to a problem like this? Did I ever see my professor do that before? Does that seem like what we're working on in our class? And then if that does seem like a reasonable answer, then that's just the nudge they need to kind of get started, and they can take it the rest of the way on their own.
The prompt isn't solve this. The prompt is, what's a good first step? That's it. That's the whole strategy. And it works because once a student owns step one and actually understands why it is step one, the rest of the thinking is genuinely theirs. And AI becomes the nudge, not the answer key. We started this episode with 42, the answer to everything, but without the question, without the reasoning, without the steps. It's just a number. And that's what this whole conversation has been about. Here's what 10 instructors reminded me of today. That asking students to show their thinking can be a bit of a trust exercise. Because for a lot of students, showing their work, showing where they struggled, where they got it wrong, where they had to start over, that's vulnerable. And they've spent years in classrooms where vulnerability wasn't rewarded. So yeah, the receipts, the reasoning, the margin notes, the why not this? That's where the learning lives. But none of it happens without a classroom where it feels safe to show the mess. If this episode gave you a strategy to try or a shortcut you want to steal, follow the show and leave us a quick review. It's like showing your work, but for podcasts. And if you know an instructor who's stuck in the right answer loop, be sure to share this with them. We won't tell. Thank you for joining us on the What and Who of EDU, and we'll see you next time.